Don Machholz, and you are listening to Looking Up with Don. This is the Looking Up with Don podcast, episode number 17 for the week of April 29th, 2020. The related website for this podcast is donmachholz.com. That is spelled DONMACHHOLZ.com. 2 H's. What's up in the sky this week? As our week begins on Wednesday, April 29th, the moon is about 40% full and in the evening sky. Each night it grows brighter and sets nearly an hour later. The moon will be full on Thursday, May 7th, so until then our nearest neighbor makes a great target for binocular and telescopic observation. Every night is different as the terminator, the line separating the dark from the light, moves across the face of the moon, revealing more and more of the lunar terrain. Last week we talked about seeing the young moon, that is, the slim crescent moon, a day or so after its new moon phase. So how did that go for everyone? Last Thursday night I watched it set behind a cross on a hill 5 miles from my house when the moon was 24 hours, 10 minutes old. I used my 4 1/4 inch reflector at 30 magnification. I saw it visually, and it was easier to see visually than with the photograph, but I did take a few photographs with my cell phone, and in the image it's barely visible after processing. You can see one of these photos by downloading it from my website. Now, I've been giving you maps each week. You can pick them up at my website, but now I'm adding photos. Go to my website, donmachholz.com. Podcast 17, photo number 3. And while you're at it, you might want to download Podcast 17, photos 1 and 2 for later in the podcast. The planet Venus still dominates our evening sky. It's quickly becoming a crescent as it's moving more and more to between us and the sun. While you're out looking at the moon this week, take a gander at Venus. Even in binoculars, when held steady, you may be able to pick up the crescent shape. The Eta Aquariid meteor shower peaks on the morning of May 5th, with some meteors also visible on the mornings of May 4th and May 6th. However, the full moon on May 7th will mean that the moonset will be just before dawn, even on May 4th. Nevertheless, you might want to go out and see what you can see. The meteors appear to come from a point about 15 degrees northeast of the planet Mars. These meteors are from Halley's Comet. As Halley's Comet orbits the sun, this is the outward leg, and these are left over from the comet as it's moving away from the sun. In October, we also have another meteor shower. It's also caused by Halley's Comet, and that one comes from the constellation Orion. So will you be able to see the International Space Station this week? This week, most of the world will not be able to see it. Those north of about 60 degrees north will not see it at all. And those between about 30 degrees north latitude and 35 degrees south, that's a large part of the world, also will not see it. South of that is South Australia and all of New Zealand, it's in your evening sky, sometimes twice per evening. And between 30 and 60 degrees north, there will be some morning passes this week. That includes Germany, Turkey, France, England, Japan. To determine where it will be in your sky, you can go to the website heavens-above.com, enter your location, then click on ISS. Let's talk a little bit about comets. Use podcast 17, map 2, to locate 3 comets in our northern evening sky. The tick marks along the timeline for each comet indicate 0-hour universal time. The moon is brightening in the evening sky, but if you wait until after moonset, if you live far enough north, they will still be visible in your northern sky, although they might be underneath the North Star. The brightest of these 3 comets is the other Comet Atlas, C 2019 Y1 Atlas. It outburst a bit last week, and it is still holding strong at magnitude 7 or 8. Under good skies, it should be visible in a pair of binoculars. The comet was closest to the Sun in mid-March, at about 80 million miles, and as it moves away from the Sun, it should be dimming, but as we say, comets are unpredictable. It will be visible in the northern evening skies until mid-August. Comet Pan-STARRS C 2017 T2, a trustworthy comet, holds strong at magnitude 8. It reaches its closest point to the Sun next week, at about 150 million miles, and may shine at the same brightness for the next month. It's not going away anytime soon. It will remain visible in our evening sky through August. Now, the next 2 comets will be visible for perhaps only the next month or so. The first is Comet C 2019 Y4 Atlas. This comet is headed toward perihelion, which is its closest point to the Sun, on May 31st, at a close distance of only 23 million miles. It gets really hot that close to the Sun. A few weeks ago, it brightened. Then the comet nucleus fragmented, with at least 4 pieces visible when imaged by large telescopes. It has dimmed in the past week, but it is still visible. Let's watch what happens over the next month as it moves south and into our morning sky. These first 3 comets are presently in our northern evening sky. The last one is in our southern morning sky. That is Comet SWAN, C 2020 F8. It's doing well as it continues to move northward. It's presently magnitude 7 to 8, and it's showing a fine tail. It will be closest to the Sun on May 27th at 40 million miles. A few days before that, on May 22nd, it will be within 5 degrees of Comet Atlas 2019 Y4, but that comet, as we just mentioned, is of unpredictable magnitude and tenuous existence. The moon will not be in the sky, but the comets will be only a few degrees above your northeast horizon at morning twilight if you live in the northern hemisphere. And that will be on May 22nd, which is still a few weeks away. Podcast 16, that's last week's podcast, map number 2, shows Comet SWAN through the end of this week, and it's easily visible from the southern hemisphere. Those living in the northern hemisphere will have their first look near the end of the first week of May. A good project to do over the next few weeks is to find a location from where you have a low horizon to view these comets in late May. For Comet SWAN, it will first become visible from mid-northern latitudes during the first week of May, almost due east. On May 22nd, it will be in the northeast sky. So take a drive if necessary and scout out a place you can go in early morning hours in a few weeks. The lower the horizon, the better, but try for one that is no more than 5 degrees high. But wait, there is more. A new comet called C 2020 F3 Neowise was discovered recently by a satellite named Neowise. It was once an infrared satellite named WISE. It exhausted its coolant and was repurposed under the new name. This comet may reach fifth magnitude in early July as it rounds the sun in our northern morning sky than the northern evening sky. I'll discuss this more as we near early July. Presently, it is low in our evening sky and faint. That, once again, is Comet Neowise. Now I want to introduce you to a brilliant star, the brightest star in the northern hemisphere. This is a good friend, visible from all of northern hemisphere and most of the southern hemisphere. That star is Arcturus in the constellation LUWD. These nights, the star is visible in your northeast sky at evening twilight. It's labeled on podcast 17, map number 1. This map, along with all maps and photos related to this podcast, are free and can be downloaded from my website, donmachholtz.com. Arcturus is magnitude minus 0.05 and is the fourth brightest star in the sky. It's a red giant, but it doesn't appear red to me. I see it more as yellow-orange. It's an old star, and it's 25 times larger than our sun and more than 100 times more luminous as our sun. It sits 37 light years away from us, relatively close. So the light you see left the star in 1983. What were you doing in 1983, which was a good year for generating starlight? The name Arcturus is ancient Greek for guardian of the bear. The constellation LUWD looks more like a kite than a herdsman. 2 short stories. First, the World's Fair in Chicago, USA, was held in both 1893 and 1933. In 1933, they came up with the idea of using starlight from the star Arcturus to convert the electricity to turn on a switch to turn on the floodlights at the World's Fair. This star was chosen because it was believed to be 40 light years away, matching the number of years since the World's Fair was last held in Chicago. We now know that it's 37 light years away, so the light actually left in 1896. Second, Arcturus is my birthday star. Every year on my birthday, October 7th, I go out in the evening and look at the star Arcturus. It's low in the west, and if I wait too long, it will have already set. With melancholy, I remember the time in 1965 when I got my first telescope on my birthday and set it up in my backyard in Concord, California. Actually, it did not start out well. The field of view on that 2-inch refractor was small. The finder scope was a hollow tube, and I had trouble finding things. I tried for several evenings in a row. This was no fun. I was about ready to give up the hobby. But on the third evening, I picked up Saturn, and the tide turned. Slowly, my attitude and skills improved. In the quietness of my loneliness, I learned my way around the scope and around the sky. Small steps with minor accomplishment, more encouragement than discouragement. For me, this is where it all began, in a backyard in Concord, California, with a $20 telescope. Less than 10 years later, I would begin my systematic comet hunting program from that same backyard. You don't have to wait until October 7th to see Arcturus. Go out and see it this week. To you, what color is this old giant? Notice that it is at the base of its kite-shaped constellation. Go out tonight to see Arcturus. not as bright or blue as Sirius. It's in Boyotes, you see, above his left knee. A sight to behold for the curious. Let's get a pair of binoculars and fix that on the star Arcturus. This is a shining beacon, and the color, whatever it is, should be more apparent in binoculars than with the unaided eye. For a better look of the color of a star, defocus the binoculars a little bit to make the image larger. There's also a nice field around the star. Now we're going to put our telescope on the star Arcturus. Arcturus is a single star, so don't look for a companion. At public star parties, we made it a point to show this to our guest. We also showed the star Vega, which is a blue star, and Antares, a red giant that does appear red, and we thereby demonstrated the various star colors. For the past 2 weeks, I've been sharing some experiences that came out of 15 years of comet hunting from a mountain called Loma Prieta in the Santa Cruz mountain range, south of San Jose, California. I made 1,600 trips to this site from 1976 through 1990 and discovered 3 of my first 4 comets from there. I spent more than 4,000 nighttime hours there scanning the sky for comets. Maybe only once or twice a year did I see this site in daylight, and that was to take a few photos of the area and of my setup. 2 of those photos are on my website ready for download. They are Podcast 17, Photos 1 and 2. Photo 1 was taken from the south, pointed almost due north. It shows my setup with the summit of the mountain in the background. Photo 2 shows me wearing my electric socks, which I described in detail on Podcast 10. It also shows my ground cloth, radio, rechargeable flashlight, and eyepiece tackle box, which is behind the chair. From time to time, I would see other astronomers setting up and observing there. I first met Rich Page at Loma Prieta, and over the years we became good friends. Rich still lives in the San Jose area, and he's a very good astronomer. Rich Page was with me to confirm a couple of my comet discoveries the day after each was found. He was also with me the night we searched in vain for a comet that I had discovered in 1988. After that comet had rounded the sun, we were expecting to see it in our evening sky, but it had disintegrated. We did not know that. We simply knew that it was nowhere to be found, and I came to the sad realization that it had vanished. That was the same night that Kirk Gibson homered against the A's in the World Series. I lost the comet, and our Oakland A's lost the game. Not a good night. Several times, astronomers who worked at the Orion Telescope Center in Santa Cruz would bring a few telescopes out for observing. Beginning in 1979, the San Jose Astronomical Association conducted their Messe marathons here. In 1980, we had so many vehicles that the sheriff was called out and told us that if we continued to block the road, we would all have to leave. So we all reparked our vehicles. I did about a dozen all-nighter comet hunting sessions, which begin at early evening dusk and they go until dawn. Those were the years when I would cover the whole sky each month, from the southern horizon to the North Polar region, from the western sky in the evening to the eastern sky in the morning. That would take me about 35 to 40 hours of sweeping. In 1976, I did 553 hours of comet hunting, followed by 504 hours in 1977 and 496 hours in 1978. Nowadays, we don't need to cover the whole sky, as the automated search programs cover much of the sky, leaving only a few areas for visual searches. One January 1st, after a morning session, I left the site and started down the mountain, and I saw cars pulled over on both sides of the road. I stopped and asked someone what was going on. They said they wanted to see the first sunrise of the year from the highest point possible, and that this was a spiritual quest. I have since learned that yes, this is a thing. A few times in the early morning while driving home, the road would be filled with hunters on the first day of hunting season, deer and boars mainly. One night I drove to the site and found a large truck parked near my site on the other side of the road and 50 yards past. It was like a rental moving truck, U-Haul, or maybe a Ryder truck. Odd for 3 a.m. Someone was in the back of the truck operating machinery using a generator. Were they counterfeiters? Was this a drug lab? Dare I approach and ask? I did. The guy said he was building some cabinets for his wife, doing some woodwork unbeknownst to her. I wondered what he told her when he got home, like, "Where have you been all night?" The Loma Prieta earthquake on October 17, 1989 was actually centered about 10 miles south, but I felt the pre-quake to that quake about 2 months before. I had just set up my 10-inch reflector and found M74 as a warm-up object before I began my comet hunting. I was looking at it and the telescope shook, and at the same time I felt the ground wave under my feet, up and then down, a single wave. It was a small quake, about magnitude 3, but they say that was a precursor to the big one. Looking through my notes, I see that I brought a lot of people with me as guests. Everyone who knew me knew that I was a comet hunter. I did not talk about it much, but I was always thinking about comet hunting, and my social schedule was controlled in part by my comet hunting schedule. Eventually, the curiosity would get the best of them, and they would ask if they could come along. Co-workers, friends, people from my church, they all wanted to know what I was doing up on that mountain. Along the way, I found something rather curious. While I am comet hunting, I can listen, but I have difficulty putting together sentences and talking. I have long suspected that the part of my brain that processes visual information and is on the alert for fuzzy objects is the same part that controls talking, and I can't do both at once. Or maybe I'm concentrating so much, like maybe someone playing a video game or someone driving a dangerous mountain road, that I cannot mentally break away to assemble sentences. My parents and siblings came up on at least a couple occasions to see comets that I had recently discovered. One night, a female friend came with me to spend some time and talk while I comet hunted. She brought a sleeping bag so she could lie at my feet on the ground cloth. Things were going along fine. Suddenly I heard, and then I saw, a small mouse grubbing around on the ground cloth. This happens from time to time. The mouse doesn't bother anyone. They sniff around. They find nothing interesting and they move on. They have never really bothered me, but hey, that's not the point here. To speak or not to speak. If I don't say anything and the mouse goes away unnoticed by her, all would be well. But if she notices the mouse before I say something, she would be in for the shock of her life. We want to avoid that. So I said as gently as I could, "You have nothing to worry about, but a little mouse has been hanging out here, and he's here and you're there, and you have nothing to worry about." I've never seen anyone move so fast. She spent the remainder of the session lying in the trunk of my car, away from all danger. My late wife, Laura, we were married for 33 years until she passed away from a stroke in 2013, would often come up with me and sleep in the back of the truck while I comet hunted. After our son came along, he joined us for these nighttime treks too. When the moon was a few days past full, I would start my evening sessions. I would begin comet hunting at dusk, then leave shortly after moonrise. As I drove down the mountain road, eventually I would catch the glimpse of a bright light in my rearview mirror. What was that? Was it someone driving behind me? Someone out there in the hills with a flashlight? No, it was the moon in my mirror. I thought if I ever wrote an autobiography, the chapter about Loma Prieta would be entitled Moon in My Mirror. I had no cell phone those days and no way to communicate with anyone from that location. In case of emergency, good luck. One morning I had put away my chair, hiding it in the bushes, and was walking back to the car down an embankment about a foot high. The next thing I knew, I was face down in the middle of the road. I simply fell. It hurt so much, I decided just to lie there for a few minutes. No cuts, but some bruises and torn clothes. As I've thought about it, I took risk commuting to the middle of nowhere for comet hunting in the middle of the night. But all through history, explorers and discoverers took risk. That simply goes with the territory. Christopher Columbus, Ferdinand Magellan, James Cook, Edmund Hillary, cosmonauts, astronauts, they all put their life on the line. And here I am, risking danger from others through foul play, danger from nature through mountain lions and poisonous snakes, and danger from even myself falling off an embankment. My wife Michelle and I are working on a project on our property in northwestern Arizona, which would allow astronomers with all levels of experience to enjoy the night sky and the security of our astronomical oasis, which we call home. Elevation 4,600 feet, dark skies, low horizons, access to a variety of astronomical instruments or bring your own, and a guest suite in which to unwind. That's what we're talking about. It's not ready yet. It'll take a few more months to prepare. I'll keep you posted. One night, I was comfortably comet hunting and I heard some animals approach. I could hear their high energy in their footsteps and breathing. I jumped up, put on my glasses, and was met with two large dogs, playful as ever, one white and one black, jumping up and licking my hands. This lasted only a couple of minutes as I was wondering, are these dogs lost? Are they stray dogs? Wild dogs? No, they had collars on. They belonged to someone. Before I knew it, they continued down the road, happy as ever. Not a care in the world. May your life be like that. You have been listening to Looking Up with Don, podcast episode 17 for April 29th, 2020. Once again, the related website for this podcast is donmachholz.com. That is spelled DonMachholz.com, 2 H's. God willing and pod willing, I'll be back next week for another episode of Looking Up with Don. We will discuss what's going on in the sky, our weekly check on Comet Atlas and Comet SWAN, the astronomer's sleep schedule, and vitamin A. Thank you for listening. See the sky this week. I'll see you next week.